When it comes to dividing your property in your divorce, there's a lot at stake. You could lose things you bought during the marriage and even things you had before getting married. In this video, we'll discuss everything you need to know to protect yourself. You've worked hard for the things you have. Now that you're getting divorced, you have to divide your property. You want to be reasonable, but your spouse is asking for too much. This can lead to a lot of arguing. You have important rights that need to be protected right now. You only get one chance to do it. We can work with you to protect your rights without costing you a fortune. Together, we can ensure that you get everything you're entitled to. Then you can move on and start the next exciting chapter of your life. The first thing to know about dividing property in your Massachusetts divorce is that your property will be divided equitably. That doesn't mean equally necessarily. Equitably just basically means what is fair. And what is fair? Well, that's up to the judge ultimately, but you have a lot of input between yourself and your spouse. So the judge wants to be fair in all things when it comes to dividing your property. The judge will look to certain factors when making the determination of who gets what. Among those factors are the length of the marriage, the conduct of the parties during the marriage, how much each spouse contributed to the marriage, and how much each spouse earns or is capable of earning. There are two categories of property when it comes to a divorce. There's marital property and there's separate property. Marital property is basically anything that was bought during the course of the marriage. It doesn't matter who bought it, and it doesn't matter whose name is on it. Separate property is property that's bought prior to the marriage, or perhaps it's a gift given during the marriage, specifically for one person alone. Or if one person receives an inheritance from, say, a relative while you're married, but it goes directly to that person. Sometimes marital property and separate property are combined, and the question becomes, what is it? Is it marital or is it separate? For instance, let's say that you had some money prior to the marriage. You took $20,000 out of your savings and you used that for a down payment on your house, a marital property. Now the $20,000 was yours prior to the marriage, but the marital home was purchased during the course of the marriage. Sometimes what can happen is that you would get credit for that $20,000 that you used from your own money in order to buy your marital home. If you own a home, it's probably your most valuable asset. It is for most folks. We'll talk briefly here on how a house is divided in a Massachusetts divorce, but I also want to let you know that we have a full video where we go into a great deal more detail. Check that out here. Is your home a marital asset? Well, the question to be asked first is, when was it bought? Was it bought prior to the marriage or during the marriage? If the house was owned prior to the marriage by one person, that would be considered separate property. However, during the course of the marriage, the other spouse may contribute to such things as making the mortgage payments, making improvements on the home, or just generally maintaining the home. That then becomes marital property. The fight is on as to how much is separate property and how much is marital property. The distinction as to whether something is marital property or separate property doesn't always matter when it comes to divorce in Massachusetts. That's because all property is divisible by the court. So even if the judge thinks that what you have is considered separate property, he or she can still divide that property between yourself and your spouse if they feel that it is equitable to do so. If you're considering getting divorced in Massachusetts, please go to affordlaw.org/checklist. We've come up with a checklist of the 7 most important things you should be considering before filing for divorce or as you're going through the process. Another big issue in Massachusetts divorces are how are retirement plans going to be divided. So retirement plans such as 401ks, pensions, IRAs, and so forth are divisible. The question becomes, how much was earned during the course of the marriage? So let's say you had a 401k that started prior to the marriage and continued during the course of your marriage. So what you want to try to figure out is how much that account grew over the course of the marriage. Therefore, it would become marital property. If you and your spouse have debt, that also has to be divided in your Massachusetts divorce. Debt is considered a negative asset. So it's considered an asset, but obviously it's something that you have to pay rather than something that will pay you. So it must be divided between yourself and your spouse. The same rules apply when it comes to dividing debts as it comes to dividing assets. That is, it's an equitable division. The debts that are secured by an asset, so let's say the mortgage on your home or perhaps a car loan on the car. The person generally who receives the asset also has the debt that goes along with it. Can you modify a property division order in your Massachusetts divorce? Generally, no. Those are not modifiable or changeable once an order is entered. So let's say, for instance, that you go into your separation agreement, come to an agreement, or the judge orders that property division. That's basically it. That's why it's so important to make sure you have your best foot forward when going towards making those decisions. You can modify your property division in your Massachusetts divorce after the order has entered, but only in very rare and limited circumstances. In order to change your property agreement, you have to show that that agreement came about as a result of mistake, inadvertence, excusable neglect, or newly discovered evidence or fraud. You only get one chance to do a property division. There's a lot riding on it. This division could affect your financial future. For more information on Massachusetts divorces, please feel free to visit our next video.